Hi everyone and welcome to the webinar, Want Conversions? Build the Ultimate Lead Form with our special guest Brad Geddes. I will be introducing Brad in just a moment. This is Anna Sawyer. I'm the Marketing Manager here at Trada and I'm very happy to have you all here. Before we get started, I'm just going to go over a couple of details. First of all, yes, this webinar is being recorded and you will receive an email later today with a link to the recording and the slides. Next up, we would love it if you would use the hashtag #PPCLeadForms when you're tweeting about today's webinar. Please go ahead and also use our guest Brad's Twitter handle, which you'll see at the bottom of every slide. We will give a Amazon.com $25 gift certificate to one person at random from everyone who tweets today, so it's definitely worth it to tweet out some of the things that Brad talks about today. If you have any questions, please go ahead and type them directly into the chat box. We will get to these questions at the end, and we will get to as many as we possibly can. So now it's my pleasure to introduce Brad. Brad is one of only 2 AdWords seminar leaders, and he's the author of Advanced Google AdWords. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Anna. Good to be here.
So I'm going to go ahead and just let Brad take this right away. If you see someone named Sarah Fox in your chat, this is our awesome marketing intern here at Trada, and she will answer any questions that you might have. Again, please type questions in as you think of them, and please feel free to tweet the presentation. Brad, please go ahead and start with how to create forms that convert.
Excellent. Thank you. So when you look at websites in general, the majority of conversions happen through a form. It could be a contact form, an e-commerce checkout still goes through a form, a white paper download goes through a form. Forms are responsible for most of the way conversions happen. They're also the worst optimized section of the entire web. In general, they're really poorly done. So what we're going to look through is what you should consider when you're making your form, and then some common mistakes to avoid. So before you even create the form, you need to first look at what someone gets in return for filling out the form, whether it's a product itself, whether it's a callback, whether it's a white paper download, and determine how valuable that information is. That's the first step. The second step then is to look at what you absolutely must collect so you can provide that lead or that white paper to them. What's the minimum amount of information you need? So then once you have your value of data and you have the information itself, here's your biggest question before you even start. Are they equal? Because if you ask for more valuable data than what you're giving away in return, you're going to have a high form abandonment rate. If what you're giving away is much higher than what you're asking for, then either you could leave very little information on the page and have nice conversion rates, or ask for additional information, but every time you add another field, you will see your conversion rate start to decline. Now, what's important when you talk about value here, it's not true value. It's perceived value, and there is a big difference. So if another way of increasing conversion rates is to increase the perceived value of the product as well. But if you have these 2 items, what you're acquiring and the value of the item, and they're not the same, that's when you really have more issues with conversion rates and have to increase what the value of the product is. Now, when you're looking at then what are you going to ask? Once you pass your minimum amount of information, you'll have minimums you have to get depending on what type of form you have. There's certain questions that should never ever be required. One of them is, how did you hear about us? This is a very poor question to ask because you're not going to get true responses. I work with a company they're a large company up and down the East Coast, and they spend several $1 million a year on advertising. And they'll occasionally survey people and say, how did you hear about us? Now this company while they spend several million, they don't spend a penny on TV advertising. Yet every single time they survey people, the #1 answer is television. They can put this on a form. They can move TV to the top, to the middle of the form, to the bottom. It's always #1 answer is TV, the medium they don't spend money on. So this is what your analytics is for. You should not have to ask questions like, how did you hear about us? Your analytics will tell you that information. You also have to be careful about what you're asking. Because a lot of times you may ask a question which you think is very easy to understand. You understand the question because it's your company. But if consumers can't answer the question, and especially if it's a required question, they go back and they end up searching again. This is really common in the mortgage industry and more technical industries where someone says, hey, what kind of loan do you want? Do you want a 30-year fixed, a 5-year ARM, and interest only? And if you ask a question like this, the consumer doesn't know what it is. All you did was drive them back to search with a list of keywords to learn. So in cases where you're asking more technical questions than they can usually answer, try a page before the form that lists out, here are our 4 loan types or our different types of products. Here's our top benefits. Which one applies most to you? And often what we end up with in larger companies is this big fight between marketing and sales. Marketing says to the sales department, if I can get you a name, an email address, and a phone number, you can call them back. And sales says, no, no, no. I want to know their cell phone number. Can I call them on a Saturday afternoon? What industry are they in? How much money do they make? In times like this, there's often a compromise you can do instead. Where on page 1 of the form, you ask very simple questions. Name, email address, phone number. Save to database. On page 2 of the form, you put up those additional questions. Hey, to personalize your experience with us, would you give us some more information? Now, not everyone's going to fill out page 2 of this type of a form. But then what sales can do is based upon the data they do get. They can order their queue based upon how hot the prospect is or how light it is, and then decide where they're going to start their contacts. Now, there are 3 things that whenever you affect them online, you have to be careful. Time, money, and family. And forms definitely affect time. They may affect money and family depending on your industry. So when you see a form like this, and this happens to be a 7-page, 300-field form, it just seems intimidating. Now, it turns out this particular company is for a merchant account application. They actually need this much data. They had really bad conversion rates. They added a single line to this form, 7 pages, 1 line that almost doubled, not quite, almost doubled conversion rates. They put a line that says, this will take you 30 minutes, or call us and we'll walk you through the form. That right there told someone time investment. So this is where if you have longer forms, you might want to make them look really simple. Hey, here's step 1, step 2, step 3. Here's how easy it is. So respect people's times on forms and set expectations beforehand of what it's going to take to go ahead and accomplish filling out a form. Now, this usually makes sense when you tell someone, don't let your developers write your content. And that's why you have content developers. Maybe you're a good writer. However, most form errors are written by developers. A good test you can do is go to your form, fill out nothing at all, and hit the submit button and see what happens. If the form goes through, well, then you have a problem validating data. If you have these pop-up boxes that say, these fields marked with asterisks are required, and then you see the page and have to start hunting through where these asterisks are, you're going to lose conversions. In cases where you need to validate information, don't use those pop-up boxes. They're really common. Take the page, just re-highlight it. Say, here's where some of the errors are. That makes it really simple to find then what the problems are on the page. So just make sure that you're not using either a pop-up box or at the very top of the page, there's a list of required fields, and someone's got to hunt for it. Because as soon as you make someone work harder to fill out a form, you've lost more conversions. Now, when you're designing forms, if you need a lot of checkboxes for whatever reason, once you pass about 5 checkboxes, it's best to break them into columns. Because this, again, will make the form appear shorter. It won't be actually shorter, but it will appear shorter when you start breaking them into columns once you hit 6 to 8 options with checkboxes. But again, be careful, because unless it's one of those that you really need this information, giving someone lots and lots of checkboxes and asking for questions and they're reading all this data all of a sudden takes more time. So again, this goes to what's required and what's optional, and making what's optional be very streamlined. Now also, never pre-fill fields. Because what happens is when we're filling out a form, we look for blank items. If the field has information in it already, well, it appears that we don't have to fill it out then. So if you have things like enter your name here, or your email at mail.com, or you expect someone to replace that data with their own information, just get rid of the pre-filled information. Leave all the fields blank. Now, one of the big problems, especially with longer forms, is that it's easy to skip certain items. So if you start looking at the data from your forms and you find that you're having a lot of errors in the middle of a long form where someone's just skipping a field, well, the problem is with white backgrounds, there's nothing that focuses the eyes of going through a page. So even trying out just white background work, something that focuses eyes, can make a big difference in conversions, especially for longer forms, because now there's a focal point. White by itself doesn't have a focal point, so it's easy to jump from step 1 to 4 to 3. So this is something, just if you see a lot of errors, especially in the middle of longer forms, do a little test. Here's your standard form with a white background. Here's one with a little bit of a CSS layering to it. Which one has less errors overall? Now, another issue is that if you're using calendars, some countries use date and month, some use month and day. So if you're going to have your forms across multiple countries, use a calendar picker. This way it's one of those little icons that shows the calendar where someone can choose the date, because that's universal by country, an actual calendar. Formats change by country. So there's also whether if you're doing currency. Some countries use a decimal point like the US before you have your cents. Others use a comma. So be careful with multi-country forms, with calendars, and with number inputs to make sure it's being parsed correctly. Now, unfortunately, this happens to me at least once a week. I'm on some site, and I want to give my credit card. I'm trying to give my credit card. And I put my credit card in and submit it, and I get an error that says, please use spaces, or don't use spaces, or please use dashes, or you can't use dashes. If someone's giving you a valid credit card, accept it. Take the money. Your developers, your back end, should do the hard work of parsing out spaces and dashes or adding in whatever for your system. Don't reject when someone's trying to give you money. Now also, most forms use a submit button. They just call it submit. Don't do that. Instead, try a benefit message. Try something else. Here's a free quote. What would you rather do? Submit your data, get a free quote. Submit your data, or join something. So don't just use submit buttons for your forms at the end. Use something else that stands out a bit more and also is an indicator of what's going to happen on the next step. Now, captchas are terrible, and this data comes courtesy of SEO Moz. But captchas are bad for forms. They don't stop spam. Well, they stop a little bit of spam. They stop conversions a lot. So here's a test that was run where there was a captcha on the page. In blue is the conversions, green is the failed conversions due to captchas, and red's the spam. So a lot of failures, but not very much spam. When you remove the captchas, yeah, you get a little more spam. You get a whole lot more conversions. In fact, a couple weeks ago, I was with some people, and we were attempting to open up a Facebook business account real quick to do a $10,000 experiment on something. And there were 5 of us in the room. And after 10 minutes, we could not get past Facebook's CAPTCHA and put that 10 grand on a LinkedIn test instead of Facebook. If Facebook didn't have that CAPTCHA, they would have another $10,000 right now. So CAPTCHAs stop conversions. You can filter out spam in your own system. That's sort of your job. Now this data comes from Blue Fountain Media, who did a test where they had a basic quote page. You have request a quote, submit, fill in your basic information, the way a lot of quote pages look like. Now the problem with a form like this is you don't know what you're going to get from it. So they changed their form around just a little bit. It says, here's what you're going to get. Their conversions went up a whole lot. The amount of information is the same. In fact, this form could be designed better, but it still uses the submit button. You don't know quite everything that's going to happen, but because there's better expectation setting, this is what's going to happen if you fill out the form. Now, you have an expectation on the page, and you have a reason to keep filling it out because you can see right within the form itself what's going to happen and the benefits. Remember, we do things for the benefits of filling out the form. But you do need to test. It's been written a whole lot recently that you should add all kinds of social things to your form. So hey, you're going to join 14,000 more people. Social proof is involved. So this is a test that DIY Themes ran, where they had 3 different forms for just a simple free email subscription. 2 of them use social proof. 2 of them focused on the fact that it's more free in the parentheses, etc. This is what you need to test, because what happened was the variation without social proof, the middle one, which is the purple one, had a much higher conversion rate. So conversion rate for that one ended up at almost 2%. The others around 1%. Well, that's double. That's a really big difference in conversion rates. So you do need to test things because sometimes social proof does work well. Sometimes it does not work well. Now often a big question is, what can we expect for conversion rates overall? So usually if you have a really simple form and you have good data, that's sort of the assumption here, it's a good value for what they're getting. You can often get 10 to 15% with really simple forms. Now, if you take that same form, though, and add more fields, even though it's the same value, your conversion rates are often going to drop 50% or more just by requiring more information. So this is where, like a lead gen site, you see often 1 to 10% conversion rates, and that sounds huge, 1 to 10%. That is big. Usually the biggest difference in conversion rates for lead gen is whether the phone number is required, because that's personal. Email, we're used to giving out an email address, that's fine. Maybe if you like mail, you can get a packet in the mail. Phone numbers are personal. So if you're going to even just do a simple test on a lead gen site, do something phone number and not phone number. Look at the difference. If it's an autoresponder, a white paper, maybe you decide, let's get more people into our CRM system first. Invite them to webinars like this where they can do more in-person demos. And for the webinar invite, we'll require the phone number, or we'll do a lead collection form afterwards. So sort of the biggest difference a lot of times with forms is, do you want more people to see your information, or do you want more qualified people to get it? And that's a big difference, because if you just have name and email, you'll get lots of leads. You'll get a lot of good leads and a lot of bad leads. As soon as you start asking for more information, you're going to get less leads, but they will be more qualified leads. So this is one of those big differences here where you may want to even just talk to your sales force or who has to deal with all the leads to see what do you want more of, because they can't have both. You can't have lots of qualified leads. You either get lots and lots of leads, qualified and non, or you just get lots of leads overall. Now, ways of increasing conversion rates on forms. Credibility elements, great. VeriSign, Seal, your authorized.net, if you're a mortgage lender, you get your Fannie Mae. Credibility things are wonderful, wonderful for form pages. Now, often you'll make pages that are just dedicated forms. Be really careful with rich media, either images or videos. So we do a lot of seminars for AdWords. As Anna said, I'm an AdWords seminar leader. And we did some tests on our pages, and we added video. It was terrible for our conversion rates. Everyone watched the video. It was great. We got lots and lots of views on the video. It detracted too much from the form. So in that case, took the same form, removed the video. On the testimonial side, testimonials, client lists, they're great to add to form pages too. But you want to understate them. So what we did was we made those a light gray color. We made the required field, so the information we really needed, a darker, like a black color. And so you have the testimonials on the page, or you have it give you your client list, whatever credibility elements you want. So it's there. Still you get the credibility from it, but it's not the focal point of the page. So that's another thing to think about with forms is you may have the exact same form. Just by adding credibility elements, you can increase conversion rates. So with form design overall, step one is think of the value, the perceived value of the information. Step two is how much data you're going to collect. And are those two equal, or is your value higher than what's required? If so, that's what you're going to ask for, but then make sure you tell people what they're going to expect. Make sure you add credibility elements to the page, and then change your submit button to a benefit message. And from there, you can obviously start testing more inputs. But that's the basics of making a great form where you can have big changes in conversion rates just by following those few simple steps of how you really design a good form. Thank you.
Brad, thank you so much.
Anna.
Wow. Such incredibly, information-dense content. This is really, really excellent. Folks, I know I have a lot of questions from you. Please continue to type your questions directly into the chat box. In just a moment, I will be moderating those questions and asking Brad to ask as many as we can possibly get to in this 45-minute period. We might go over just a little bit because we want to get to as many as we possibly can. Before we get to questions, I want to take just a moment to talk a little bit about what Trada does. We're talking about lead forms and your lead forms that live on your website. What Trada does is we do paid search. This is how you get people to your website to fill out that lead form. It's a little different from anything you've probably seen before. This is crowdsourced paid search. So Trada has a large global crowd of paid search experts, and they do online advertising for you. It actually doesn't cost any more than if you were to do it yourself because there are no fees, and these guys are paid based on performance. Now, because multiples of them are working at the same time, you get this great diversity of thinking. They have the time to do constant optimization, and you can advertise across multiple ad networks without working in different systems. So we work on Google, Yahoo, and Bing, and finally, it is pay for performance. There are no fees. It actually costs exactly the same as if you were to do it yourself. So if you've been thinking of advertising on Google, Yahoo, and Bing, or if you're currently advertising and you're spending hours a day optimizing these campaigns, you can hand it off to our experts. They'll do it for you. You'll manage it from a high level to make sure you don't lose control. And you can actually get started right away. So if you're interested in a Trada demo, please type "I'd like a demo" right into your chat box, and we'll let you learn a little bit more about what Trada does. So I want to get back to Brad, and I'm going to start just handing some questions out here to Brad. A lot of these are very tactical. I really, really love the content that you put together, and I think people have a lot of really tactical questions about exactly what to do on their forms, which is great. So our first one comes from Lewis, who says, isn't it better to request twice the email address, or to request the email address twice to make sure that you have a valid email address? Brad, can you take this one?
Sure. So once versus twice. So I find, and this is a general statement, I find that if it's a simple form of name, email address, that adding the second email address often lowers conversion rates a bit, and the misspellings are so few it doesn't matter. I find that for longer forms, then I often do like to validate it. And so it sort of goes through, if you're filling out 50 fields, then you're not going to spend that much time on any one field. So validating is a good idea. If it's going to be a really short form, I see very little issues. I can say that on the one newsletter subscription that we have, I think we have like 20,000 subscribers now, and we only ask for email, and name and email. I believe the rate of invalid email addresses is something like 0.2%. I mean, it's a minuscule number as opposed to the difference of asking for it twice. But again, it's also a simple test to run. But general statement, short forms no, long forms good idea.
Great. Thanks so much, Brad. So our next question comes from Rekha. Can you please have Brad talk a little about forms on mobile? Do we have to behave differently on a mobile form? Should we be thinking about mobile forms differently?
Yeah, so mobile forms, and so first off, let's first say that tablets you can use like you would desktop computers. Tablets are not like a true mobile device. They have better keyboards, etc. I find for mobile devices, short forms really good idea. You're not going to see a lot of credit cards inputted into mobile devices, and that I find that when someone's on a phone, get the quick, easy lead, and then follow up with an email or whatnot where they're on a tablet or desktop. It's more complex data. I know there's been a lot of studies recently about how mobile commerce is $1 billion or $4 billion or I don't know, whatever number it is. And while it's a true statement, the biggest problem with those studies is most of these purchases are done in app. So you have the Amazon app on your phone, and then you sign your Amazon account. So you don't put in the credit card number. There's not a lot of people just typing in credit card numbers and so forth on mobile devices. So usually shorter on mobile, definitely better because it's hard on a forward screen to see lots and lots of fields. Do not use captchas at all on mobile devices. And do not use JavaScript forms on mobile devices. If you're going to do true web devices, don't support JavaScript. Smartphones do support JavaScript. So with the page that can cross over between the two devices, don't use Java-based forms. Make sure they're just straight, HTML5 or whatnot. I hope that kind of answers the question. A sort of convoluted answer.
I don't think it's that convoluted at all. I mean, I think, the lesson here is when you're on a mobile phone, you want to have as few steps as possible between, yourself and something else, because mobile can take a while to load. It can look kind of weird. It can be tiny. I mean, this is really great advice. So Donna wants to know, what are good forms to use on a WordPress site? Do you have any ideas for like plugins or forms that seem to work well with WordPress?
You know what? So my favorite form building system is Wufoo. It's wufoo.com. It's a nice little form-based system, and they have, I think, both a free and a paid subscriber. I'm a paid person for it. And then they can just hand you an iframe or a script or whatever that you can put in your WordPress site. It's been several years since I've tried the WordPress plugin for forms, and I didn't find I liked any of them very much. And so I found Wufoo a few years ago, and I absolutely love it. So I use that. Actually, our site's all WordPress, and it's all Wufoo forms. The other reason I like it is that it saves all the data to a central database. So then, since I assume a lot of people here also do paid search or organic, what we end up doing is we take all the customer-submitted data and look at the keyword density of the words the customers actually use to see if there's additional paid search organic keywords we want to rank for or buy based upon the customer's natural language. And so I find having a central database of your form inputs allows you to even use your form data not just from the lead gen side, but also from a keyword standpoint, or building out FAQs on your site, additional content as well.
Cool. Thanks so much, Brad. So I have a question that just popped up that I think is a really interesting question. So regarding a CAPTCHA, would it be better to ask a question related to the site or product instead, i.e., for if it's a car site, a car has how many tires? So it's sort of like a clever question that a robot wouldn't be able to answer. Do you think this is a cool idea to sort of reduce the amount of spam you get?
Yeah, you know what? I've seen those do decent. Assuming it's, you're not a smart car site that has 3-wheeled cars or something. But that I've seen do okay, and I haven't seen big difference in conversion rates by asking that. I've seen sometimes a slight drop. The one I would be careful of is someone came up with a suggestion that it sounds great on the surface, where let's put a field in our form that's hidden, so it's not displayed by the consumer, to the consumer. But a robot won't know that. So then if this field has data in it, let's assume it's spam because the person couldn't have filled it out. So on the surface, that sounds great. But what I found in reality happens when you do that is there's a lot of auto form fillers. So I use, say, LastPass. I've got a couple other form fills on my browser. When I use my form fill, it will still often fill in the hidden fields. So while that sounds like a great idea, I have found other issues with doing it that way.
Cool. Thanks so much, Brad. So here's a question from Brandon. When using forms in conjunction with a phone number, where is the best place to put the phone number? Is there a best practice for this?
If it's a one-page form, usually, okay, so first off, think about your business model. Because there are some models who they want the form data, they don't want the phone number. There are others who just want the lead. So sometimes you may hide the phone number a little bit just because you want to scale your business and not talk on the phone all day long. So we're talking conversions here, not necessarily you may do other things for business reasons. Generally, the phone number at the very beginning of the form is a good place to put it. If it's a really long form, putting it near the end of the form is also a good idea in case someone's not quite sure what they're submitting. If you have a multi-page form, put it at the top of each page. Just remind someone if they have questions, they can call you. But again, the more you put the phone number up there, usually, and again, there's always exceptions, usually the more calls you're going to get and the less form fills. So it's harder to scale stuff. So it really kind of depends on what the business model is.
Okay, yeah, that's definitely an interesting thought. Brad, our next question is from Jonathan. It is, would you recommend using A/B testing with Google Analytics? And if so, how is it best to set it up? So what is your favorite A/B testing tool for forms specifically?
Well, first off, I think you mean not Google Analytics. You mean Google Website Optimizer.
Google Website Optimizer.
So that sort of depends. So if you're making all the forms from scratch, then Google Website Optimizer works just fine for testing. What I find is more common, though, is that you are using some sort of third-party add-in system, whether it's Salesforce or the Woof one I mentioned or Batchbook, someone who's got an embeddable form, that you can't just split the form up with Website Optimizer because it already has the pre-populated fields you made in the third party. In that case, you're just going to make two completely different forms and do more A/B testing. So that's really kind of the difference, really at the high level, is it you making it yourself, or is it a third-party form that you can't do Website Optimizer with? Well, Website Optimizer is great for doing form testing if you build it yourself.
I've also been a fan of Optimizely, which is a very user-friendly A/B testing tool, and it does allow you to test just specific elements within your landing page, and I believe it works for forms as well. I don't know if you've ever tried this one before, but I'm a big fan.
No, I've used Optimizely in landing pages. I don't think I've used it for forms, so I don't think I could answer that one or the other. It's an easy tool to use, though. Yeah.
So I have a question for you, just kind of along the same lines. What elements would you suggest starting your A/B test with? I mean, what are the sort of perhaps the most important elements to be testing just right off the bat?
The optional fields. And when you think of testing at the first endpoint, it's before we add social proof and credibility elements, let's see how much of a difference our optional fields and base fields make in asking questions. That's usually number one, because often you'll see very quickly that too many optional fields lowers conversion rates. So by first figuring out the fields, then you can move to design, because now you can look at your design with how many fields you're truly going to have in the form. Or if you start with design first, and your number of questions starts moving around, your design may fluctuate a bit. So then number two really is saying here's what you get and more credibility elements on page. I find that helps just a tremendous amount. And what I usually find is that, and again, there's all kinds of exceptions here, is that by the submit button, that's usually when someone starts thinking that last pause of do I want to give them this data. So what I usually find is that the elements of things like verified by VeriSign or authorized.net or some of those social proof seals are better at the bottom of the page. I find if you're going to run a rail across the page as well, that usually testimonials or our current clients or things like that are better along the side of the page. Now, the one thing I'll caution about is the hacker safe seal can be useful in certain cases. So this is something I would say test. I don't just want to bash hacker safe here. But I've seen a lot of times, especially on, say, mortgage type leads sites, that when you put the hacker safe seal at the bottom, it doesn't tell people that your data is safe from hackers. It almost reminds them that this could be hacked. And so I find that sometimes certain seals have actually lowered conversion rates and not increased them. Hence why you need to sort of look at some of those seals.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. I actually think that's a great idea for a split test. I mean, that's something I hadn't really thought of before. We always are, encouraged to put these sort of, these validation seals down at the bottom, but especially the word hacker, that's kind of a terrifying word, I think, for people who are entering a lot of sensitive information. So this is another question from me. What do you think about the idea that the best form is no form, and that if you have, great content or offers, you should make them as accessible as possible, and your leads will seek you out? This is a sort of idea that I've heard, from some people or read in books. Do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah. Okay. So I have quite a few thoughts on this. So the very first question to ask yourself is, do we want everyone to see this content, or do we want something in return? Because if you just give away your white papers and your files and everything, then more people will see it. But you won't have any follow-up ways of following up with them. And I find in a lot of industries that you need to sort of push people along the path. And you need to give them a nudge here and there. And email is the easiest way to do it. I'm in a good autoresponder list or something. Or often in B2B, you have where someone downloads a white paper, and then you invite them to a webinar, sort of push them the next step. Then you push them to, say, an in-person demo, or maybe a webinar demo type of thing where it's just one-on-one. Then you try to close a contract. That you sort of have to push people forward. And I find that when you give data away or you give content away and you hope they come back, that hope is just not a good marketing strategy. I think we can all agree.
Yeah,
it kind of depends on, do you want everyone to see it, then give it away? Do you want value so you can nudge them along the process, then make something required? I'm more of a fan of at least collecting something from it personally. Well, I guess that it depends, right? If you have a blog, your blog is free. If you make valuable white papers, then that part requires an email or something to get it. So I guess you could do two simultaneously.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, if you have a blog, your content strategy is basically based on hope. But also, I suppose linking and, being intelligent about it, it's actually not that dramatic. But that is a good parallel to draw. So I have a question now from Keith, who says, for data validation, is it better to do it interactively or when the user submits?
That's a great question. So for a short form or a non-technical person, at submit is fine. If you can run the JavaScript or the whatever inline to do the data validation as they go, especially for longer form, I find that's much better overall. That's a fantastic question. The one thing to caution with validating data is often email addresses, because a lot of developers, especially with the US-centric developers, assume it's got to end with an @ sign and have a dot and a 3-character .com, .net, whatever afterwards. If you're doing international stuff, then you may have .co.uk, there's 2 dots, or .co.uk or .ca, which is Canada for just 2 letters. So I would Also double check the data validation by the countries you're possibly in, because I have seen forms that really mess up in other countries because of how either their TLDs work or how they're writing numbers or so forth.
So I have another question for you here. Sorry, they're coming in incredibly quickly. So this is, I think, a really interesting question from Ro. How do you grab incomplete form fills, like when they sorry, this is a question from the same person. Are there ways to write field data into a CRM without them hitting submit? So I think the question is, if someone is entering information, is there a way to collect that information as they enter it so we don't have to rely on them hitting submit? Are there tools that allow us to do this?
So, I mean, I don't know tools. Ajax can do it. You can do it in Ajax. I don't know about HTML5, but I'm not. I always tell my coders what I want to happen, and they make it happen. So that's where I touch too technical for me here. But I know it can be done, because I know if you go and use Gmail, use Google Voice right now. Right when you go in to say Google Voice and your options, you hit a check button that says you want this to happen, and you don't hit submit. They're automatically saving it. So I know Ajax can do it. I'm sure there's other ways of doing it as well, but you would have to ask your developer how it's done. As far as the other part, the kind of question alluded to, I don't know if it was asked explicitly, is seeing what fields are actually filled out. There are tools out there, and unfortunately I'm drawing a blank at the moment, that will tell you what field individually was missed, what fields were the error parts, which are great to know. You can also use things like event tracking and Google Analytics to track some of that, to see which individual fields were causing the errors to happen. Because then you want to sort of go back and look at those fields, that question, what are you asking for, to see if maybe you want to reword the question or get rid of the fields completely. But even seeing within a form itself which fields cause the problems is a good piece of knowledge to know.
So just to be clear, are you saying in Google Analytics you can see where people abandoned on a form? You can see like abandonment trends in Google Analytics?
If you use event tracking, so that when someone fills out an individual field, you do a return, and this is again is over my head how to code this. I know it's possible because I know a couple sites that do this. They're using event tracking on the individual fields to see which ones are not filled out. You can also use things like, Crazy Egg doesn't give you the they give you where things were clicked on, but you can use some of the heat map stuff to see this as well, where you can see the heat maps where people spent time within the forms.
Yeah, I think I've seen some of that.
Yeah, I'm a little spoiled by Wufoo because they give you the error rates on the forms. The other thing I probably didn't mention, which I also like to do with forms, is say you have a complex question that, depending on how one answer is, changes the next set of questions you're going to ask. In cases like that, you're better off hiding all those additional question fields until one of the questions has been answered the correct way and then displaying them. Because that way it sort of looks shorter. They're not going to see questions they don't have to answer. Sometimes you see a form right in it says, if you answered this above, then please fill out this section. Or if you answered this, fill out this section. Not like the IRS forms, right? You're trying to figure out what you have to ask and what you don't have to. Hiding and unhiding fields based upon previous selectors is also a very useful thing to do, just to make a form less intimidating looking.
We're actually getting a lot of suggestions in the chat, by the way. ClickTail, Yotam says, ClickTail does form analytics, including field-by-field drops and abandonment. That's pretty cool. Michelle shared a link with us.
Yeah, that's a great
tool. I've actually never heard of them before. That sounds great. So I want to be respectful of everyone's time, so I'm just going to take a couple more questions. By the way, if we didn't get to your question, I will post the questions and answers on the landing page where you guys signed up, and we'll see if we can get Brad to answer a few more of the questions offline. So I have a couple more questions for you guys. This one's from Nathan. What are your thoughts about having two forms, one for an easy lead and a more complicated one provided in case the visitor wants to share more information?
So this is where I like a two-page setup, where it's page one is the really basic information, saved to database. Page two is here's all the really complex information, saved to the same database, so that way the information is still combined. And then let your sales or whoever it is order queue based upon inputted data. I really like that. The other reason that I like that is it's not just for getting a quick lead and then qualify on page two. It's that if you ask a really simple, and when you think about designing multi-page forms, ask the easy questions first. Don't ask the personal questions first. Ask the easy questions first. But I'm often will design a form where page one is like two simple questions, and then page two is two simple questions, and these take like all of 8 seconds to get through. And then page three is just a touch more information, and page four is the final. Okay, now give us his personal data. One of the reasons why, and this is where you test it, because sometimes this doesn't work. But someone's filled out 3 pages so far. Why don't they only spent 30 seconds doing it? They have time invested. And so now they see, oh, okay, if I just give my phone number now, I can be done and I finish this task. And I sometimes find that if you're going to ask for like cell phones or you want to ask for very specific information, and this doesn't always work, that's why we test, but do a couple the really easy stuff first. And that way a couple pages have gone by, and so it was a time investment on a consumer, and they realize they're almost done with the task, and often see it's more likely then for them to hand out the really personal stuff at the very end.
I think that's interesting because, I think many of us would say ask for the personal information first on the first page, because then once they hit submit, then we've collected that. But you are saying, lure them into this idea of making an investment.
Yes, and this is why you test it, because this doesn't always work, but I find that often it does, because who does the easy questions, right? Like, are you using a CRM system now? Yes. Do you want to have a better lead flow through your system? Yes, right? Like simple stuff, right? And on page two, maybe it's what are your major goals with your CRM system? And then page three, okay, how do we contact you to show you about Salesforce or Oracle or whatever? I find that lure thing, because okay, so let's take this from a psychology standpoint. And my background's in personality theory, psychology, so I often go back to like how people do things and what they want to do. So when someone fills out a form, they also get to finish a task. So you're not the only getting stuff from this. They finished it. Their boss told them, hey, go collect me 8 white papers so I can go do a total cost of ownership analysis on something. Well, they have to go do this. So therefore, when they see the end is almost near, they're more likely than to give you that last bit of information so they can be done. So that's why I find that luring process is great. Also, don't discount the thank you pages of a form. I find most thank you pages say things like, thank you for filling out this form, download this white paper now, or thank you for filling out this form, we'll get back to you someday. Someone got to a thank you page because they gave you a level of trust, right? It's something they handed you, whether it was a name or possibly a credit card. Thank you pages are great places to put additional conversion activities. If you care about, say, Facebook likes, well, someone finished a task on your thank you page. They're going to Facebook next. Get the like on the way. Good place to put that Facebook like. Or if you're doing, say, a white paper, put on your thank you page, well, thanks for downloading our white paper. We'll send you an email where you can download it. Would you like to join us for this webinar? And you can see how it's used in action, right? And I find thank you pages are totally underused from another conversion standpoint, whether it's a micro thing like Twitter or Facebook to a more macro thing such as either a cross-sell, upsell, whatnot.
Yeah, or you could even say, sign up for our blog series. We've even experimented here with putting a survey saying, you have a chance to win if you fill out this survey about, what sort of information you're looking for in the future. We've tried a lot of different things on our thank you pages, and I totally agree that they're so frequently underutilized. If you're an e-commerce site, you can put a coupon there. I love the idea of maximizing, the space you have on your thank you pages. So, folks, we are running short on time. I'm going to take one more question. Christine wants to know, do you suggest supporting text below the call to action button, or do you think that sort of muddies the look?
It depends on what you're doing. In most cases, I'm all for it. Or actually, I'm often in favor of changing the call to action. First off, the button should be some sort of a benefit call to action. So I don't know if I don't want to claim credit for this, but I started in 2001. I did a lot of autoresponder lists back then. And I started putting right next to, say, email subscription buttons, like the simple statement, we hate spam as much as you do. And I see this common now. That made a really big difference in conversion rates because it was a sympathy. We didn't have a privacy policy, didn't say what we're going to do with your email. We just said, we hate it too. Well, that's a pretty simple statement to make. So again, I'd test it, but I find for really simple forms, yeah, it can be really useful. I'd probably be more hesitant on either a longer form or an e-commerce site because people know how to navigate an e-commerce site. So I may be more hesitant on that than I would on like a short form of more social proof for what you're going to get type of thing.
I think that's a really good point about we hate spam as much as you do. It creates a little camaraderie. It's kind of funny, a little bit witty, Yep. It's very clever. I like it a lot. I think you can claim credit for that. Why not? Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. If you have any more questions, please go ahead and send them to Sarah here at sfox@trada.com, and she will make sure that they get to the right person. Brad, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a really excellent presentation. We loved having you.
Oh, thank you. It's always fun hearing everyone's thoughts and questions and so forth as well.
Everyone, I highly suggest you go out and buy a copy of Brad's book, Advanced Google Analytics. We have a copy of it here at Trada. I'm on the wait list. Oh, sorry, Advanced Google AdWords. I apologize. Yes, I'm on the wait list here to read it here at Trada from the Trada Library. Yes, check it out, Advanced Google AdWords by Brad Geddes. Everyone, thank you so much. You will get a recording and some slides later today, and this is the end of the webinar.